Welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast, your go-to source for all things Maryland policy and politics. I'm Jack Wilson, 2025 MACo president from the Queen Anne's County, representing District 1. Each episode brings insights from the state and county leaders, deep dives into key issues, and of course, a few dad jokes along the way. Thanks for tuning in.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson and Karrington Anderson today. And today we're going to get into some of the biggest headlines and separate what's actually news from what's just noise. Some stories will have real implications for Maryland policy, politics, and the 2027 legislative session. Other news may generate headlines today, but fade just as quickly. So Michael and Karrington, are you ready to go for another segment of news or noise, which I've found to have been very, very good so far? I like these.
Yeah, happy to be here and ready to get into it.
Yeah, I like this brand too. And I feel like we did one around a month or so ago to wrap up issues from the month of May. And at that time, there was sort of loose chatter around the General Assembly reconvening for a special session, possibly. And yeah, like this sort of came up in the context of the June primary, which I know we're going to get into today. But I feel like it's worth calling back that conversation. We called it news that a special session looked like it was in the offing. I'm feeling pretty good about that prediction from the month of May as we sit here in June, and now there's a little more specificity in that conversation. It feels like we kind of got on that one.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that kind of feels firmed up and looks like maybe coming back in July or maybe even early August, and really to focus on the congressional redistricting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the redistricting is the impetus for it, and that's not a real surprise if you've been following this podcast and the general chatter around town. It sort of came up as an election year issue. It was a hot topic during the legislative session. The idea of a special session has shifted it a little bit, but I think, it sounds like the details and the timing may be coming together. So I don't know, if you listened to us a month ago, we said this is probably coming. I'm feeling pretty good about that.
So I will say one thing. And by the way, if they want to get something on the ballot, they got to do it by July 31st. So I think that if they are looking to come in and put a redistricting question on the ballot, they would probably be looking at that mid-July timeframe. But I will say one thing. Calling members back, especially right after a primary election, is never a simple thing. A handful of sitting legislators just lost in their primary election. Others are kind of wrapping up their legislative careers, and you're asking everyone to come back for what could be and will be a very politically difficult issue. So that in itself is a unique dynamic, even, by Annapolis standards. So I think we'll see what happens here. I think logistics are tough, and maybe some stuff with politics. We'll see what happens with a potential special session.
Ooh, okay. All right, Kevin. So I was feeling good about putting this comfortably in the news column and sort of patting ourselves on the back for doing so a month ago. Now it feels like you're hedging a little bit. So that's, I don't know, that's kind of interesting. That sounds a little noisy to me.
I won't say it's noise yet. I mean, I'm definitely hearing some rumblings that maybe it's not as news as we think it is. It is, again, complicated. You need 29 votes. So, maybe it is less secure as news than you'd think at this point. That's just from Kevin. So I'm still generally on board with the fact that everything points to them coming back. But I think, maybe just put a pin in that for now.
And I guess you were saying end of July would be the practical deadline, just like to get it to a printer and get the ballots finalized and so forth in time for a November primary. So we had heard news that this might be into the month of August. You're thinking that's cutting it too close then?
I think so. Yeah, I think if anything, and I think, what we're hearing is that if they did come back, it would be, and again, that mid-July, July 18th, whatever it is, that time frame. And again, if it's redistricting, if it's something else, they're not limited to just one subject, right, or one bill. So we'll see what happens. But again, it is pretty complicated.
Yeah, not constitutionally limited to one topic, but it might be that there's an agreement with leadership and y'all can put in other bills, but we're not going to hear them or deal with them.
Exactly. So moving on from the potential special session, Karrington, you helped to anchor MACo's coverage for the June primary elections, and that's a bit of news from this month, if you will. So let's get into the stuff we saw in the primary.
Yeah. So as we're recording today, it's July 1st. There are still ballots being counted, so there still is some room for some late twists here or there. But I do think we have a pretty good idea. And I think a good race to start with would be one of the ones that everyone in Annapolis has been watching, which would be the Senate president's race.
Right. So, I mean, these are the primary elections. So this is not the sort of showdown over ideological differences between red and blue. It's rather within the primaries and so forth. But Senate president got a lot of attention, relatively speaking, for a presiding officer, one of the leaders of the legislative body, to have a contested election and a relatively aggressive challenge. Got a bunch of attention. And I don't know, there's like an old saying in politics that when you're in an election, you're in a contested election, that you should always, like conduct yourself, run like you're down by 10 points. And I feel like Senate President Ferguson really did that. I saw him really visible, doing videos and social media and a lot of focus on things that he's led through the Senate and delivered for the district and things like that. I mean, he ends up winning the primary relatively comfortably, but it was unusual to see that much focus on a primary for one of the top tier legislative leaders. That was out of the ordinary for us Annapolis denizens.
Agreed. And yeah, while maybe not the showdown, it does feel more and more common that the primary election is the one that really counts. Not for every race, but for a lot of them. But yeah, for his race, redistricting does really seem to be playing a part in that, I guess. He was thrown right in the middle of that issue, really whether he wanted to be there or not.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And +1 for me, Michael, on Senate President Ferguson really getting out there, knocking doors. He was very, very visible in all the channels and out in his district. And I mean, look, whether or not he was truly, that was ever truly a race, I don't know. We saw some phantom poll come out from maybe his challenger supporters that said it might be close. But all in all, there was a ton of coverage about that race. And he was very prominent on the redistricting issue. And like you said, Karrington, whether he wanted to be or not. But the Virginia court's decision kind of made his worries look pretty legit, at least to me. And of course, you had this massive timing issue with election deadlines and local boards having the information they needed to pull off a primary election. So I think he was right to raise concerns about hindering our local election officials and state election officials from doing their jobs because maps are in flux. So I think overall, he was a very prominent figure there. It's a ton of pressure on him. But I think, again, once you got to a certain point, it was really a moot point because, our local boards of election, the state board of election needed that information so that we could actually run the primary election.
I mean, I made note of this, I think, when we talked about this earlier in the same sequence, but Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House of Representatives, coming to town and applying pressure on Maryland leaders, particularly the Senate president, like that's like the sunny day magnifying glass on the little bugs kind of pressure. If the question is whether the Senate president surviving a meaningful challenge after this kind of in the microscope and in the blender and on social media treatment, if that's important, I think that's news. He comes through, does a good job, makes the case to his voters and gets sent back. I think that's newsworthy.
Yep, I agree with that.
Yep, I agree. Okay, so other state races, I guess I would point out 2 high-profile legislators who were upset in their primary races, Senate Majority Leader Nancy King and the House Appropriations Subcommittee Chair Stephanie Smith. Impactful changes there. Do we think that is news or noise?
I mean, legislative leaders who don't come back, and it's not because of their decision to step down, but because the voters speak. It's always news. I would say from where we sit, there's a spin on this that, I mean, everybody's just talking about new faces in Annapolis, and that's newsy enough. I would say the interesting facet for stakeholders, including counties, is both of these legislators were real leaders on education policy. Delegate Smith, her subcommittee in appropriations is the Education and Economic Development subcommittee. Senator King has been a visible and vocal leader on education policy from her seat on the Budget and Tax Committee, which gets its hands in not so much the workings of education policy, but sort of all the finances and form and all the blueprinty kind of stuff tends to come through budget and tax. So both of these are legislative leaders who have their hands on education stuff. Both of them were pretty involved in the development and passing of the blueprint plan that we're in the middle of. And I don't know, like we've had a lot of turnover among the people who were big players back in, years ago when those bills were getting passed, who won't be part of the back end of its rollout.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing, Michael, that, we obviously did extensive coverage during the Kerwin Commission and then, on the blueprint itself and the rollout, and we still talk about it a lot. It really wasn't that long ago, but a lot of the lawmakers who built that policy and helped to pass that policy are gone or they're on their way out. So I think that is at a minimum a meaningful amount of institutional knowledge leaving town, especially because we're in the midst of the implementation. And I do think, Nancy King, the majority leader, obviously she's budget and tax committee, and she was a big leader on education, and she's been around. That was a bit surprising to me, but at the end of the day, we'll have to see how they can fill that vacuum, because on budget and tax, she sort of is the go-to for education stuff. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And there are some other changes in the state legislature, but those two losing from leadership roles seems like the top line news. And, you guys talking about this is a big deal from an education perspective, with education policy in particular, makes me think that is the real news there, more so than any of the national trends showing up in Maryland.
I don't find any compelling takeaway that this is one more element in the what's going on with the Democratic Party. Let's look at one race in the House of Delegates in Maryland or in the Maryland State Senate. I'm not buying those big narratives, but it is still it's a big deal for those of us working on the ground in Annapolis.
Yeah, and of course, no real surprises in the statewide races. I guess. I mean, Dan Cox, a rematch against Wes Moore for governor. Name recognition there. We'll see if that outcome changes a lot. But Michael, I don't know. I wasn't on board with maybe Dan Cox winning that primary, but we'll see. I know you were watching that closely too, and maybe some of the markets.
Yeah, like my interesting takeaway, this isn't really about the race itself, but there wasn't a ton of polling in the Republican primary for governor, at least that I saw. I mean, there were a couple internal numbers, but a lot of undecideds and nothing that was particularly compelling to me. I would say, I think you're with me here, Kevin, that I was hearing chatter from the sort of insider Annapolis class that maybe the party had said Cox had his chance. Former Delegate Dan Cox had his chance and wasn't able to make a particularly competitive race 4 years ago. So the party's going to move on. And one of the other aspirants will end up winning this primary because of fatigue with Cox. And I thought, I heard that and thought, okay, I guess I can see it. I could see that happening.
Yeah, and Michael, if you also if you're looking at the signals, you also saw members of the House Freedom Caucus endorsing someone who wasn't Dan Cox, and that had sort of been his base. So that was another signal, maybe that the base had weakened for him at least, or fractured a bit. But the insider talk, definitely, I agree with you that maybe it was time to go a different direction.
Yeah. So despite that chatter, though, if you're the kind of person who pays attention to these sort of online prediction markets where you can buy and sell shares of some event, sort of like buying and selling stocks, which I confess I happen to be a guy who does that stuff. I'm interested in it and I follow it. The prediction markets were heavy on Dan Cox the whole time. So the way these typically work is you can buy a share at some fraction of a dollar, at a certain number of pennies. And then if the event happens, your share will pay a $1 dividend. So if you buy it at 20 cents and you get lucky and the thing happens, you get $1 for every 20 cents you put in. Shares on Dan Cox to be the nominee were selling in the 83, 85, 87 cents on the multiple betting markets, even though insiders like us were chirping around, maybe he's not it, maybe there'll be somebody else and so forth. So I don't know. I'm kind of a believer that these prediction markets have an intrinsic value just for purposes of saying real people with real money have made their opinion known. And that's maybe better than the random internal poll or, the chatter you get on the street from somebody else who calls themselves an insider. We collectively betting our money probably know better than you and me together, Kevin.
And just to put a, finer point there, I may or may not, just for anyone who thinks they can beat these markets, I may or may not have sent a screenshot to Michael with that market, and then followed up soon after by screenshots of mansions, like Mac Daddy mansions in Guam, because I thought we would just mop it up, and that the markets were wrong. So for anyone who thinks they can beat the market, and I'm glad we didn't put a significant sum in there and make that bet, but just keep in mind that the money knows. Normally the money knows. That's all I'll say about that.
All right, that's interesting, because you two clearly are the kind of people that do follow that. I'm not one of those people, but I mean, they did get Dan Cox right, so maybe more than just money to play around with or fun, and maybe people should actually be paying attention to these.
I think there's a lot to it. I mean, there's a whole, there's a broader policy conversation on that stuff. But as far as an interesting tool to see what's happening, I'm a big believer. On election night, I'm watching prediction markets much more than I am watching television telling us with 8% reporting, here's how many votes are in one county or in one race. I'm more into the markets.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. So we are hearing some talk about states, even Maryland, passing laws to ban insider trading on these platforms. We can step out of the election results for a minute and ask, do we think that chatter is news or noise?
I mean, look, I think there's so much to get into with these markets, and we've all, if you haven't seen the stories, I don't know. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you've seen stories at the federal level, at the state level, about people with insider knowledge. Like, to me, it's the same thing. You're not allowed to use insider knowledge to make money in these markets or in the stock market, right? And I think this is just an example of government being slow to catch up to these technological trends, right? We don't have laws for prediction markets like we do for the stock market and with insider trading. So it's only a matter of time. And I think that we've seen some stuff with maybe some weird things going on, and some stuff that maybe has a partisan slant to it, and some people are turned off by that. But I do absolutely buy this as news. I think we're going to see bills to ban that kind of stuff in the next legislative session. The governor's already taken action here at the state level, and I think several governors or legislatures across the country have weighed in on this. But there are also issues at the federal level, and again, but I do think this is just government not catching up as fast as it needs to the technology that's out there, and we see that all over the place. And I know we've talked a lot about that on the podcast, but I think it's absolutely noise.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at too.
Yeah, I suspect that's probably right. I mean, the governor's already announced an executive order that employees in the state government are forbidden from participating in prediction markets on things that would, that they would have an effect on. So that's like getting after the insider trading thing that you can do as a policy for an administration. But yeah, we'll see legislative bans on, scurrilous activity, or maybe the whole thing. Like, it's possible, Maryland says, we want people to get out of here. I'd be surprised if we did that. I hope we don't overcompensate to the bad actor subplot.
For Michael's sake, let's hope we don't, right? Let's hope we don't. But you can always watch those markets. I agree, Michael, on your central, I think, comment there is that don't worry about watching the news when the results come in. Just watch these markets, because the money always knows. And so moving on a little bit from prediction markets, we had our county elections too. Lots of large, significant county executive jobs turned over due to term limits. So a lot of new faces coming up here when they're sworn into office very soon.
Yeah. And obviously this is the bulk of what MACo is tracking and blogging about, is the county elections. And I think we have something like a 50% turnover to the MACo board, right? Something like that.
Yeah, we'll be in that ballpark.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll probably have more than 40% turnover of all the county elected seats that stood for election this cycle, between term limits and the voters having their say and asking for a change, and then some people who have to run for have to give up their county seat to run for a different office. Whether you win or not, you still leave the county office. So we typically have 40 to 50% turnover these 4-year cycles anyway.
Yeah, and Montgomery is one of those that is going to have a new county executive, and sounds like there are still ballots outstanding, but the county executive race is wrapped up with council member Jawando stepping in as the next county executive.
Yeah, it sounds like some of those council seats, Michael, are still up for grabs. And there's still, I think today, as we record on July 1st, there's counting going on at the local board of elections there. But it was too close to call, at least for some of those council seat races.
Right. Yeah, we're not trying to break news on who's going to win a nail-biter close race right now. So we're not trying to do that on this podcast. But just with general reflections, yeah, you had 3 sitting council members in Montgomery seeking the county executive race. Had the same situation in Baltimore County with 3 council members seeking the exec race there that was open because of term limits. So Will Jawando has been, like visible at our conferences and events and engaged in Annapolis. So I don't think he'll be a brand new player, assuming, in come December, he takes over as the new county executive. He kind of knows the budget process and knows how to work with and around the county government. Being the executive's a different role, but it's not like he's going to walk in off the street. So I think, he has an opportunity there. It's also interesting. The outgoing county executive, Mark Elrich, went through this 8 years ago, sitting as an at-large council member and then becoming elected through a competitive primary to win a couple times as county executive. He's heading back to the council. He comfortably ahead in the at-large race, while the I guess like fourth and fifth places are really close. Maybe, fourth, fifth, and sixth places are really close for who's going to ultimately prevail in that primary. But current county executive and apparently future council member Elrich will still be in the cycle, and another familiar face from Montgomery politics. So that's an interesting quirk.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting twist for sure. We also had other obviously big county executive races in our large jurisdictions. We're going to see new county executives in Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, and Howard County. The rest of our sitting county executives won their primaries. Cecil has staggered terms, and their county executive seat isn't contested until 2028. And so I think from MACo's perspective, that's a lot of new relationships to build. Although, Michael, you mentioned Councilmember Jawando. We also have Councilmember Pickard in Anne Arundel, who won the county executive seat there. So these are some relationships are already there, some new ones to build for sure. In Howard County, Vanessa Atterbury won her primary election. So she is going to be the Howard County executive. She obviously was the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. So MACo has a relationship there. But always when you have new folks coming in, new legislative priorities, new governing styles, and eventually, a new mix of voices around the MACo board and the legislative committee table. So that's also interesting. And it's always interesting from a staff perspective here at MACo. And we're eager to get those folks in the door and start, getting those relationships going and hearing what they care about heading into the next session.
Completely agree there. I just, for the benefit of our listeners, just a little inside baseball on how the Maryland Association of Counties works. I mean, a lot of people know we come to the table and offer testimony and points of view about policy that's before the General Assembly. Our members, our elected officials and county leaders participate through a legislative committee, and they really guide and drive our association's policy work. When we talk to our counterparts in other states, they can't believe we do this at the level we do, but we ask that our county leaders kind of go bill by bill through the heart of each legislative session. We take up, dozens and dozens and dozens of individual bills. We explain to them what the county effects would be, and they're the ones who decide, let's try and get that one piece fixed in this bill, or let's support that bill even though it's a long shot, or let's see if we can get ourselves amended into this bill because it would be beneficial for our correctional officers or other things like that. So that comes not just from our staff. You guys, your counterparts on the policy team at MACo are capable, but we get our general direction from a legislative committee, principally guided by elected officials. So when we have new elected officials come into the fold, that's a big deal for the organization because that'll be new people sort of steering the ship on policy.
Yeah, absolutely, which is why we do spend a lot of time getting to know those new faces or just, new people in those spots. So a lot of big changes. Of the county executive races, Hartford was a race we were all watching closely. County Executive Castley, he did have a serious challenger. He actually had two. But one was the president of the county council, who was running a pretty spirited race.
Yeah, and I know that County Executive Castley took this one seriously. Yes. Still some ballots being counted, but looks like a decisive win there with almost 60% of the vote. You also had Councilmember Giordano in Wacomico win her primary election as well. And then I didn't mention Julian Jones. Should have mentioned him by name earlier too. Council member who won the primary for the Baltimore County executive. So obviously he's a guy who's also been around MACo and been to our events and is weighed in on policy stuff. So that's good to see too. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think interestingly across these races, we're going to have new faces, but not like this isn't going to be daycare, right? Like the folks who are stepping into these roles have a background in county government. With current delegate Atterbury's case, She's been a state policy leader in a couple different areas and has worked well with local governments. She's been a moderator and presenter at MACo conferences before. So like nobody's going to have to learn MACo 101 as part of their first day on the job as a county executive. I think we have some safety there. And we're not trying to call shots on what's going to happen in the general election, but if the numbers play out the way everything suggests, I think we'll land there. I mean, across other local races beyond the county executive races, which are the easiest to grab onto, I might point to one county that's sort of interesting and chatter-worthy. Calvert County in southern Maryland, host of the state's only nuclear power plant facility, and it's been a place where energy policy has been a big deal. They've got a liquefied natural gas station there, and so a lot of conversation around energy locally. Calvert County, of their 5 sitting commissioners, only 2 of the 5 won in their primary. So the voters stepped in and had quite a lot of say in this primary. What do we think's going on there?
Well, I mean, I think that, and this is an issue that is talked a lot about nationally, and we've heard a lot about it, and I think it's a biggie. Data center politics, maybe that's what's going on. Do we think that's news or noise? And again, this is not just in one county, but certainly, Michael, as you mentioned, with the nuclear power plant there, and we know that there are big interests that would like to use some of that power to maybe power data centers, to kind of connect the dots.
Maybe, but really it feels like there was no hard stance taken either way. I mean, unless I'm missing something, it's not like they went out and approved a bunch of new data centers here and there. Right. They were just in the middle of a lot of discourse about it. So maybe that was enough to do it, I guess. I guess I would also just go with news here.
I just think this topic, it's come up on this podcast multiple times, and we saw how people talked about data centers during this last legislative session. So far as MACo has been out and visited our county governing bodies, I mean, the conversation about energy is just white hot virtually everywhere. And even in parts of the state where it wouldn't make any sense for a big player to locate a hyperscale data center, these big campuses that are going to be huge users of electricity and water and so forth. We had this conversation with each of the lower shore counties recently, and it's like, the grid and the infrastructure to carry the power to and from these facilities just doesn't even exist in the lower shore, but everybody's still talking about data centers. So, like, the politics of these big users has just gotten big enough to invade every level of politics. We've already nailed down that this is news for this election cycle, almost independent of whether it's really relevant news in your community. It's big.
Yeah, and I'll say, it's a tough spot to be a local elected official sitting in the seat making the decision, because on the other side, Michael, and look, we can say we don't have the infrastructure, and I agree with all that, for counties that aren't right in the middle of the state, but also you're being told, if you're sitting in that seat, from some of the pro data center folks, hey, you don't want to miss, this is an economic development opportunity, and if you don't get in now, you're going to be left behind. And they equate it to stuff like broadband, right? If you don't get the latest thing, you're not going to be able to keep up. And I know that even on the shore and out in Western Maryland, counties are hearing that kind of stuff. So, it's just a barrage of stuff from both sides. It seems like you can't go to a county commissioner or county council meeting now without the quote unquote data center people showing up, the pro and con, right? And they just want to make every meeting about data centers. So it's definitely news. We already know that. I will give you a bonus news or noise for data centers. Are we just living through an election year debate? Is this just politics because of the election? Or are we talking about the next 10 years of county government here? What do we think about that?
Yeah, I think I would say, of course, things are extra hot in an election year, but I just think this is one of those topics that's not going to go away anytime soon.
I think I have to agree with that too. I've engaged in this conversation with a couple people in the industry who I think are more knowledgeable than I am. Certainly are more knowledgeable about the industry, but the politics, I just can't imagine 4 or 5 years from now that no one cares anymore. Right? No. I just can't see how that happens.
Yeah, I think it's news for as long as we can see ahead, for sure. I'm with you both on that one.
Yep. So one more local race that caught my eye was Baltimore City's sheriff election. it looks like the voters are
Mhm.
set to elect the city's first female sheriff, which is just really notable. And yeah, I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, Sabrina Tap Harper won the Democratic primary and will have no challenger in November. So I think it's easy for races like that to get overshadowed, but certainly a significant milestone for Baltimore City and for Maryland and for women.
I mean, it's also another reminder that some of the most interesting election stories aren't always at the top of the ticket. The sheriff in Baltimore City, I think that's big news. I'm pretty sure, I tried to research this and it's tougher than it seems, but I'm pretty sure she'll be the first woman elected sheriff anywhere in Maryland. So that's news. Change in the primary with the state's attorney in Baltimore County is news, replacing a longtime incumbent up there. So I think, some of these things matter a good deal. We know that the elected sheriff can play a major role in policy in one way or another. It depends on the duties of the sheriff by jurisdiction. But still, that's a relatively big deal, and folks like your state's attorneys and clerks of the courts and so forth, they're on the ballot as well. That's not MACo's orbit precisely, but I think people are interested in those races, and some of those will have real consequences in your neighborhoods.
All right, so before we wrap up, we've talked a lot about serious things like budgets, elections, redistricting. Let's end on something a little bit lighter. We like to do that on these episodes of the podcast where we talk about news or noise. We don't have enough time to get into the mess that is FIFA, but let's talk about the big event that they're putting on in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada last month and this month.
So football, right? I don't know. I have mixed feelings about, how excited to be about the World Cup.
Come on.
I'm in at the appropriate level, but I have friends who, like, 3 months ago, you couldn't force to watch a soccer match and spend 2 hours doing that.
Sure.
And now they're like, well, I'm just going to have to stay up until my eyes bleed because I have to watch 7 games in a row. I've got the full subscription package, so I can watch match after match after match and that sort of stuff. And I get it. It's, I don't know. It's a fever, right?
Yeah, that's the World Cup though, right? It's always how you can't get Americans to buy into soccer. Look, this is, and I love that people think, oh, well, this is the year everybody's in. No, it's never. Look, this is me again saying this is never going to happen. Americans never going to buy in. This has been a long experiment, and there have been ups and downs. We're on a high right now, and hopefully the USA is successful. Big game tonight, but yeah, like this is not going to be the year America buys into soccer, and it's not going to be a long-term thing. We're always going to have the bandwagon every 4 years where people get all of a sudden really interested in soccer, at least here in America, in my opinion.
Yeah. Our big soccer fan colleague, Sarah, not going to be happy to hear all of that. But yeah, I like to have a lot of Philly sports related hot takes, really like that. I am not a soccer fan, and really what Michael was saying kind of describes really where I'm at. Like the World Cup for me is kind of like the Olympics every 4 years. Mm-hmm. I'm all in rooting for Team USA, but yeah, really not into it.
Right. Sort of like curling, right? I can become a curling fan for about 4 hours out of every 4 years.
Right. Yeah, man. Heck yeah. And look, and Carrington, we will do another news and noise, maybe an emergency episode on AJ Brown getting shipped out of Philly. So don't worry, we'll do that maybe in the future. But fun fact, I did attend a World Cup game in 1994 at RFK. And I think, I don't remember it too well, but I do remember just the excitement and, people just going ballistic and losing their minds. I think one of the coolest things is watching all of these fans from around the world coming to America and seeing things like Walmart and Buc-ee's and, they think that this is bananas. Like I saw one guy getting a Walmart tattoo because he just couldn't believe how wonderful, and they can't believe the gas stations. There's really one famous account, Freddie from Germany, who has now unfortunately deactivated his account, but just kind of following along and watching these people go into like rural Alabama to a small town diner. And anyway, I think that's just been really cool to see. And, I think at the same time, like I've seen a lot of stuff about, Europeans saying how great it is. And maybe it is a good reminder that it's not so bad. It is our 250th birthday. I'm not trying to get super patriotic, but we got it pretty good. And I think it's kind of cool watching people's reactions to some of the stuff we have, good or bad. Like, I don't know if we need to be able to buy, just like assign a mortgage in a gas station, but I just think it's interesting seeing people and their reactions to some of the stuff, the opulence here in America.
Yes. Yeah, Kevin, I was thinking the same thing. One thing that I have found really hilarious about the other countries, particularly European countries, discovering ranch in the U.S.
Yes.
Yeah, talking
Ranch
about hoarding.
dressing.
Yes, yeah, hoarding bottles of these to take home. I've loved watching that. It's so funny.
Like, why can you only get a pack of 13 donuts? Like, why can't I get 4? Because America. That's why. Because you can't do that.
That's
here.
what we
You gotta
do
get
here, right? Yeah.
13. You got to get 13.
And the Scottish fans, like
Yes.
basically
Oh, yeah.
running the downtown tavern district in Boston out of beer,
Love it.
and like standing on each other's shoulders and playing the bagpipes and going bananas. I mean, they're like pride for their team and pride for their side and for their country, and then they discover and they love all these quirks about America. We got the Dutch, like, what seems like tens of thousands of people all in their orange jerseys and stuff. I mean, I guess pour one out for the Dutch. I lost on penalties, but
Yeah.
I mean, like they showed up in droves. Honestly, if you watched even one match from, by the way, like in addition to the USA stuff, like that huge stadium in Monterrey, Mexico.
Yeah, it's so cool.
I don't know, man. Like that feels like that ought to be a place where we hold lots of big deal things like that. I don't know pro sports that have the intensity of like big time college football. Like I've been at the Horseshoe in Columbus, Ohio, when Michigan is in town, and it's just like a totally different passion. But I never feel anything like that watching the Commanders or the Ravens play or the Orioles game or whatever. But man, I felt a lot of that just through the TV in Monterey. I want to see lots of events from that like mega stadium, no matter what. That place is bananas.
I'm
Yeah,
sure the
I love it.
NFL is already making calls, right? Like, they need to
I would think so.
Yeah. And look, so I guess I have to do this because it's back to the news or noise, and I'm obliged to ask, even though I already know the answer. So let's not even get silly with this. Does the U.S. men's national team have a legit shot to make a deep run here? Can they win 2 rounds in the elimination? And before you answer that question, let me just lay out the projected path for the U.S. to win the World Cup. They would need to win tonight. Then they'd likely face Belgium, Spain, France, and Argentina. So I will let you both weigh in here, knowing that arduous path. Is there any shot for the U.S. here to make a deep run?
Oof.
And Michael,
It's
what are the
tough.
prediction markets saying about that?
Yeah.
I think they'll probably agree with me.
Yeah, I think the prediction markets are quirky because they are U.S. dominated, and
Yes,
because the U.S. team looked visually pretty impressive in their path to winning their group.
They did.
The price on the U.S. side, either winning or like making it to the quarterfinals or whatever, those prices all went up a little bit, even while a bunch of other countries, like France, was already built in as one of the short, the shorter prices anyway. And so they didn't move. They were expected to win. They won. Nothing happened. Yeah. The U.S. prices were going up because they look like a legitimate side. So I would say, like, I worry about if they have to play, I guess, Belgium advances. So if they got to play Belgium, I got worries about beating Belgium.
We'll see. I mean, I guess this will be after the games, but I think Senegal could beat Belgium, and maybe we'll see. But even if regardless, like, you still got to get through teams like Spain, Argentina, France. Like, that's not an easy run.
Right.
So
you got to beat a bunch of big hitters. Yeah. A lot to do. I mean, I actually like have a USA Belgium World Cup story. It's a dumb story. Maybe for another time, I guess.
No,
I think you have to do it. I think you have to do it. It's going to be 4 years before we talk about the World Cup again, maybe. So, like,
right.
I don't know if you listen to some of the people talking about AI. Maybe there won't be another World Cup. So, Michael, we might as well just get it done right now.
Right.
You got to get
this could be it.
Could be it.
All right. So, a number of years ago, I think this was in the World Cup 12 years ago, my family's not very good at vacationing. We don't do a lot of that, but we decided to do like the 7-night Caribbean cruise, like the standard U.S. You take a boat from Florida and you go to a few different points of call and all that kind of stuff.
The whole nightmare.
And we did this in July of 2014. So 3 kids and doing all the stuff and all you can eat and all that kind of stuff. It's fine. We had the full experience. But one afternoon, I said, listen, I want to beg off from family duty, and I want to go watch the U.S. because we're playing Belgium in an elimination match. We advanced to the elimination match, and Belgium was the better side, but still looked exciting. So family gave me my few hours to run off and do this. So I find one of the bars on this, enormous cruise ship, and So they're having specials for the match, and the place is jam-packed full, and I realized there's 2 specials available. So there's like a bottle or a bucket of Bud Light in bottles, or you can get a Stella Artois. And I mean, I'm not really a serious beer snob, but when I do have my snobby moments, Stella is among the beers that I would go out of my way to enjoy. And they had it with the special glasses with the little gold rim and the little shaving thing that comes off the top, like the whole ceremony, right?
For the World Cup.
And so, but I'm here to watch, like I'm here to root on the U.S. men's national team. So I can't properly go and do what I would ordinarily do and get the Belgian Stella over like the True Blue America, even though it's like InBev and, purchased by the Dutch and stuff. Right. But still, I feel like the Budweiser brand is pretty close to the hearts of the United States of America experience, right? So I'm like, just give me the Bud Light. I'm going to be the ugly American and I'm going to bang the table. Open them all. I'm going through 5 of these. So anyhow, I was committed. But I had like that moment of indecision. It's like, well, who are you really? Well, today I am tonight. I'm all USA. So anyhow, hopefully I get the same opportunity when we face Belgium soon. We advance and get an opportunity to whip them, and I'll do the same thing again.
I love it. Hold your nose. You just got to do it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's not a terrible beer, but it's not Stella.
It's no Stella. It's no Stella. I love that. So hopefully both advance and we can do that again and report back.
Exactly.
Right. All right. So I think that's probably a good place to leave it. Any closing thoughts from Karrington or Michael before we wrap up?
Yeah, I guess the last thing I would say is just, even if you know absolutely nothing about soccer, you still kind of know the answer to that question, that they're probably not going to do that great. But, I'm here for it. Go Team USA.
Anything could happen.
And you can buy shares at about 5 cents for the U.S. men's national team to win the whole thing. So, if you haven't put your toe into that pool, maybe this is your opportunity right now.
Disclaimer, this is not gambling advice. So just put that disclaimer out there. I think that's the thing we're supposed to do.
Disclaimer.
And what is it? Past performances do not necessarily predict future results.
All that jazz. I think everybody gets what we mean. Chantel's probably having nightmares right now, but we'll go ahead and end it right there. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all of these episodes are sent directly to the device of your choice. And as always, you should follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, read the Conduit Street blog. We have a big conference coming up. It's coming up very soon in August in Ocean City, obviously the MACo Summer Conference. So make sure you are registered there. But for Michael Karrington and our esteemed producer, Chantel Malcolm-Len, this is Kevin Kinnally signing off, and we will talk to you soon.